wherever farmers are, you should be too. So this was pre-COVID, of course, when it was okay for all of us to convene. And he just said, build that relationship, be a part of the community so that we can truly understand the needs of our producers so that we can then meet those needs. And so that is one reason why, since I've been on staff and before I was even a board member, I have been an active member and an active donor to this work. And I truly believe in what CFA staff and board and members are doing across the state. So if you'd like to learn more about the work, Maggie's going to throw a link in the chat box. And then also, if you are interested in becoming a member, you can reach out to one of us after, or you can also find that on the CFA website. So I just wanted to put a little bit of a plug. So before I go on to introduce our panelists and begin our discussion, I'm going to turn over the quote-unquote mic to Brittany Steffey, and she's going to go over some of CFA's food access programming that is currently going on.
Sure. I'm Brittany Steffey. I'm the Food Access Program Director at CFA. So we've been involved in a lot of food access programs across the state for quite a while, starting from like pilot projects at farmers markets all the way up through major food policy initiatives at the state level. At the moment, our big projects are Kentucky Double Dollars, which is the statewide nutrition incentive program that offers incentives for fruit and vegetable purchases and some state or Kentucky grown meat, egg, and dairy purchases at farmers markets and retail sites across the state, as well as Fresh RX, which is our produce prescription program at farmers markets for expectant mothers on Medicaid. We also most recently, during the COVID crisis, were able to fundraise and direct over $13,000 to Feeding Kentucky and Food Chain, as well as purchasing over 7,000 pounds of produce, particularly from Black farmers, for I think over 700 families in Louisville as part of the Feed the West initiative. So we're always kind of working on lots of side projects on food access, as well as some larger ones and policy initiatives as well.
Great, thank you, Brittany. All right, well, let me go ahead and let me just briefly introduce our panelists, and then we'll let them more fully introduce themselves. So we have 4 panelists tonight. So we have Michelle Howell with Needmore Acres Farm in Allen County. We have Bree Pearsall with Rootbound Farm in Oldham County. We have Jenny Williams with Northfork Local Foods, and who is also a CFA board member, and she's in Perry County. And then we have Brittany Steffey, Food Access Program Director with Community Farm Alliance, and she is based in Fayette County but works across the state. So with that being said, I just want to remind everyone, if you're having a hard time following who's talking, that you can put the screen in speaker mode, which is in the upper right hand corner, so that the person talking will pop up big on your screen. Sorry, I should have said that in the beginning. All right, so I'm just going to go with who is first on my screen, which would be Bree. So just please introduce yourself. Who are you? How long have you been involved in local foods? And how long have you been involved in food access?
All right, so my name's Bree Pearsall, and I farm in Oldham County at Rootbound Farm. I have been farming for off and on in different ways for about 15 years, and right now I help manage our farm, doing most of the customer side and the operation side. I don't get much out in the fields, except I do with the animals. I do a little bit more than I do with the veggies. So I got into farming and food access when I got a summer job during college, working at the Lexington Farmers Market for a local farmer. And that was just an entry point for me to meet a lot of people who were in the local farming scene. And I was also working at the Good Foods Co-op. And so I learned a lot about farming alongside of food access. So we are primarily a vegetable farm, and we do also raise sheep. We sell lamb, and we raise egg layers as well.
Thank you. The next on my screen is Brittany. So if you could just go a little bit more into who you are, how long you've been in local foods and in food access work.
Sure. As Jann said, I'm Brittany Steffey. I'm the Food Access Program Director at CFA. I first got into local food, especially working with farmers markets, during my time at Berea College, where I was a student, about 10 years ago now. I was actually studying religion while I was there, but as part of the labor program, worked for the ag department and the farm at Berea. And that was my intro to working at farmers markets as well. After graduating, I worked with a lot of education nonprofits and a lot of other side jobs with food organizations and restaurants. And then a few years ago, worked as the assistant manager for the Lexington Farmers Market for a few years. I was very involved with managing the Kentucky Double Dollars program and a lot of the special food access programs there. And from there, started working with CFA as the Kentucky Double Dollars coordinator. And then we've added a couple programs since then. I've been at CFA about just over 2 years, I think.
Thanks, Brittany. Let's go over to Michelle. You just tell us who you are, anything about your family and your farm, how long you've been in local foods and food access work.
Hello, I'm Michelle Howell. My husband Nathan and I are full-time farmers in Scottsville, Kentucky. We raise beef, pork, chicken, and year-round fruits and vegetables. It's interesting because I think I was actually involved in food access first before I was involved in really farming, and it was actually an experience I had when I was 7 years old. There was a program that was like focused on local food and food access, but and so as a food insecure child, I was like on the receiving end of these programs, and that really, even though I was just 7, really impacted me in a way that the rest of my life work has built on. At 16, I got a job at a local orchard and loved it. Wanted to learn more about agriculture. Went to Western, got a degree in agriculture. And then in the year 2000 was hired by the University of Kentucky to help tobacco farmers transition to fruits and vegetables. And I feel like in the year 2000, that's when the Kentucky Proud program was created. There was a lot more emphasis on food production, is what we called it at the time. And so that really spoke to me and something I was passionate about. And then 7 years ago, Nathan and I decided to become farmers, really with the priority of food access being the reason why we farm.
Thank you, Michelle. All right, Jenny, you are up. Tell us who you are, what you do, anything about yourself that you'd like to, and then how long you've been in local foods and how long you've been working in food access.
My name is Jenny Williams. I grew up here in Hazard, Kentucky, and I live here now with my daughter. I'm the youngest of 6, and all my siblings are still living in Hazard as well, and I teach at Hazard Community and Technical College. I grew up with, whatever you may think about little Appalachian children, I grew up with a really incredibly privileged childhood. My dad was a doctor. My mom was a stay-at-home mother. My father farmed for fun. He had patients who would bring him food. So I always joke that I got involved in local foods by eating it from the time I was very young. But really, I think my work with food access probably stems from when my first child was born. He's 23 now. And I got really heavily involved in breastfeeding advocacy and saw how disconnected people were from, I saw how the amount of money that people had really impacted the choices that they could make and that they were equipped to make and that they had the support to make around nutrition. In that case, breastfeeding, but it kind of opened my eyes and made me realize how true it was across the board. So really love my job at Hazard Community and Technical College for lots of reasons. One reason is because it's an institution that really encourages its faculty and staff to spend a lot of time doing community service type things. And so I'm a member of Northfork Local Foods Board, and I'm on the Community Farm Alliance Board, mostly just because I really at heart, because I love to eat, but also because I feel really passionately that everybody should get to do that. Everybody should get to eat healthy local food. And it's so inspiring to me to see people like Bree and Michelle and Brittany, and to, you know, I'm just obsessed over the food that, especially the hotel meals that Michelle's family make, because it's such an inspiration, you know, that we all deserve fresh, healthy local food, no matter where we live or what we make or what our circumstances are. And so that's my involvement.
All right, thank you. Margie, did I see a question about the difference between food access and local foods in the chat box? Was that?
Yes. I'm actually going to be moderating the chat.
Oh, I'm sorry, Kristen.
Oh, it's okay. It's okay. Yes, there was a question. What is the difference between food access and local foods?
Oh,
sorry.
No, I was going to say, do we have a panelist that would like to take a stab at it? I felt like we should answer that before we go on, just to set a good foundation. So I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at that.
I can. So I think food access to me is really looking at all the different ways that people have choices and access to food that they eat throughout the day. So, you know, looking at how neighborhoods and communities are set up. Are there grocery stores and options for people to access food, and not just are there physical places, but is it healthy food? Is it the kind of culturally appropriate food that people are looking for? So I think food access is much more looking at how people's identities position them to have full control over the food that they best want to access to be healthy. And then I think local food is kind of a little bit more of like a fluffy idea of like what we can produce in our local food shed. And I guess I say fluffy. Maybe I'll take that back. I will say fluffy. But just like what can we produce in our local food shed, whether that's raw farm products or just products that are made here locally, including like restaurants and other things like that. So I think local food just meaning like everything that kind of circulates in our community.
I'd like to speak to that just a little bit. Living in Central Appalachia, where there aren't places for big, huge farms, and where there's a lot of food insecurity, it's always, I think, a struggle to balance creating secure incomes for farmers and creating food access. And I think very often in our lives in Central Appalachia, and probably everywhere, I'm sure, those two things have kind of been at loggerheads with each other, right? They've been in sometimes direct opposition to one another. And there's actually a farmer in this neck of the woods who's been really active, who says you can't do both. You can either, and Kathy will know exactly who I'm talking about, you can either feed people or you can help farmers make money, but you can't do both. And for me and for Northfork Local Foods, that's really our goal, is to do both. We really want to create opportunities for people to create a sustainable living that's comfortable through agriculture, and we want to make it possible for people to get food. So that's really hard, you know, because I'm looking at what's been happening recently with COVID, where we've had this, somebody will have to help me with the program, where these boxes of food have come into our community. And that's such a great program, and the people really have needed that. And they are good boxes full of really good stuff from Louisville. So how do we, for me, the question is, how can we create an infrastructure around local food that allows local farmers to make a living and create an easier path to food access, so that we don't have to call farmers in Louisville, or Lexington or Western Kentucky, because we simply don't have the capacity to meet those needs with local produce. So I think it's tied together in a lot of ways that we're still really puzzling out how to deal with here in Eastern Kentucky.
And I think what you're talking about is the definition of food equity. I think that's important, that to take that next definition of food equity, that's what you're talking about.
And probably to take it even a step further, New Roots out of Louisville, who started Fresh Stop Markets, use the term food apartheid, which is a more intentional, it's kind of been an intentional making sure, and you can look back at the history of the coal camps where miners were paid, where first of all, people were kind of forced off of their land or lured off of their land and divorced from the means of producing their own food, and then paid in ways that made it impossible for them to do anything but buy processed foods from the company store with their script payments. So there's been a real, I think, intentional effort in Eastern Kentucky in the coal fields. I think that the effort to separate people living in poverty from being able to produce and consume healthy food has been intentional, at least on some level. And going back and undoing that somehow is a real challenge.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you all for sharing. If we have other thoughts about that, we can come back. I'm going to ask our first quote unquote official question, and that would be about policy. So what policy issues do you see around food access in Kentucky? And I thought I would just put it out there, and panelists, you can just decide when you want to answer. But if it gets a little dicey, because I know there are delays, I can specifically ask one of you, and then we'll go around the loop. But I'll try this first and just ask it.
Starting, I guess, from the most basic food access questions at the state and the federal level, nutrition benefits, particularly those funded by the federal government, like SNAP and the Farmers Market Nutrition Programs and WIC, and free and reduced lunch, PEBT, those things are extremely important. And as we've seen during COVID, have been extremely important in responding to a crisis in communities. Those things are often on the chopping block when there are budget cuts, or are often used for political means. And we don't want to see that happen. Those are important policy issues to pay attention to for folks interested in food access.
So at my farm, the relationship that has been the deepest and most meaningful food access initiative that we've been a part of is New Roots Fresh Stop Markets, specifically the ones here serving the greater Louisville area. So about 20% of our farm income, vegetable-based income, comes from selling products to Fresh Stop Markets, boxes on a sliding scale, sign up to the whole. It's most to see a stable, but about 70% of Fresh Stop members are buying as limited resource partners and using food stamps, EBT, WIC, vouchers, things like that. So those kinds of programs have been really essential to our farm being able to intersect and really, write food access into our business plan by partnering with an organization like New Roots. And then the Double Dollars program has incentivized, people
We may have just lost Bree. Oh,
Am I back? Okay.
you are back.
Can you hear me? Am I clear?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So programs like the Double Dollars program have really made those SNAP benefits go farther, and so that's been really impactful. I know one policy issue that we've been working on for a long time is trying to get the senior vouchers, nutrition vouchers, to be able to be redeemed with the Fresh Stop markets. And if anybody is more up to date with the progress of that, please jump in. But my understanding is that the state is still not accepting farmers, or not accepting the senior vouchers at places like the New Roots Market. And so I think that's one policy growth area that I continue to be involved in and would love to see some movement. Just lastly, I think I am really trying to learn more about how farmers of color are being shut out and have historically been shut out, and present day being shut out of the farmer assistance and loan programs that are happening and have even exploded under COVID-19. So it's a very complicated issue, but I absolutely believe 100% from the farmers, Black farmers and other farmers of color, that are telling us that they are being systemically shut out. So to me, that is one of the policy issues that I'm trying to learn as much about as I can, and figuring out how to be how to plug in.
I would add, a thought that I had was, so having done this work for 20 years now, I think we've done a really good job repositioning local, state, and federal funding towards professionals that provide support. Am I there? Okay. That provide support and resources to farmers. Like, we've done a really good job. And I'm not saying that that money has been repositioned from farmers to resource providers or professionals. I'm just saying that we've done a really good job transitioning that funding. And I think there's a lot of room to now really focus on, okay, how can we reposition funding for food production for consumers? And so, like, some of the examples, and Bree just brought these up, but for example, just the ag development boards. For example, Allen County is the #1 vegetable producing county in the state, not because any more acres moved here. And this is the first year the ag development board has included vegetables in their plan of action. And so just getting food production, healthy, fresh food production, to be taken seriously, to be included in funding options like the CAPE program, the insurance, federal insurance programs. So anyway, trying to really work towards thinking about that, so that we're seeing more farmers get started in farming, and stick with it long term. And I think that also addresses the issue that Bree talked about. If we have that funding more accessible to people, they'll be able to work on things like land ownership and, being able to make ends meet, so they can stick with farmers. And I think about that being really, really important right now. We're going to have a lot of young people thinking about what they want to do with their life. And it's a really great time to make sure that the policies are supporting some of these young people thinking about farming as an occupation.
Jenny, do you want to add anything to what these folks have said? Not to put you on the spot. Okay, I just wanted to check, and then I just wanted to round back if anybody had any other thought. Brittany or Bree, did you have any follow-up thoughts before we transition?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up a little on some of what both Bree and Michelle said. Another thing in both state and federal policy that's would be extremely helpful and is really important is not even at the legislative level, but just at the bureaucratic level, amending policies to make these programs easier, even for farmers to access. I know quite a few people on this call, looking at the names, have probably been through the FNS SNAP retailer application process personally. And it's not fun, as many of you can attest to. A lot of these programs are not designed to be simple to access, even for farmers or retailers. The same goes for the farmers market nutrition programs. And there are often a lot of very detailed restrictions, like for the farmers market nutrition programs, that block certain types of producers out, even at the federal level. And those things could pretty easily be amended. They're not necessarily federal statutes in a lot of cases, but they're there right now. And those policies do inhibit food access in a lot of cases, yeah.
So my next question for you all, why should farmers care about and be involved in food access?
Well, I think in Eastern Kentucky, farmers need to be concerned about food access because there are probably more food insecure people than there are food secure people. I know that for us, we have a fresh stop market in Hazard and have some other programs too, the double dollars, obviously. A huge part of our market success really stems from our senior vouchers, for instance. And we had some grant money left over from actually another program that we used to give community college students vouchers to spend at the farmers market. And so it's a lucrative, really at heart, I hate to sound like a dirty money grubbing capitalist, but it's a lucrative market, especially in areas like this.
Yeah, I go ahead, Michelle. I see you talking. But you're muted.
Got it. Sorry. Thank you. I was just going to say that I absolutely believe we're more stable as a farm because we're focused on food equity work. And I guess it goes along with what Jenny said. I think it represents how Kentuckians eat. Kentuckians are, if you're not food insecure, then you're eating through an institution like a school or something like that. I just feel like it's representative of who Kentuckians are, and it just makes sense for us as farmers to be representing that. But we've been thinking about this the last couple of years. I really, really believe as a farm we're more successful and more financially secure because we prioritize food security.
Yeah, I would echo absolutely everything Jenny and Michelle said. I think it opens markets for farmers. I think it builds stability, partially because the relationships that are required often to do food access work, make us more in relationship and more accountable to each other than the more traditional markets, often are very there's not a lot of, there can sometimes not be a lot of transparency. And so a lot of the core values that lead to food access work make more stable markets for farmers. And then it just feels good to be feeding the community that you see, that, you feel like your customers are reflective of the community around you. And Ben and I got into farming, partly because we love being outside and all those things, but also just a core value that we love feeding people. So it's very rewarding to also be connected to food access work.
I'll mostly echo a lot of what everyone else said. Of course, I support food access just for the sake of it being very important. A lot of our food systems are inequitable, and that's incredibly detrimental for a number of communities. On the other hand, as everyone else has said, it's just good business for farmers. We're at CFA primarily to advocate for farmers. And there's a lot of income there for local farmers, and a lot of farmers, small family farmers, are contributing to their communities. We want to support them in that. Food access work, particularly we've seen through the incentive programs, provides a lot of communities that might not otherwise be engaging with the local food system or engaging with local farmers with a way to do so and a way to build those relationships. And often those continue even once they might not have access to the incentives anymore. A lot of folks are only on SNAP temporarily or only on WIC temporarily, and will usually keep going to the market and keep those relationships going even after they're not receiving those benefits anymore. And that's really important engagement to build.
Did any of our panelists have anything follow-up they want to say before I ask the next question? All right. Well, Brittany kind of already pushed us in this direction, so it's a good follow-up. What is the diversity, equity, and inclusion component of food access work in Kentucky? And then the second part of that is, how do you incorporate this into your work?
I will say I long for the day when we can stop asking questions like that, because everything that we do incorporates diversity and equity without having to make such a point of it, when we just do it naturally. But we're sure not there yet. You know, when you look across all kinds of lines, race, sexual orientation, income, we don't have an equitable food system. In fact, we have a food system that's the very opposite of equity. Like Michelle was saying earlier, you know, this has happened, and like Mr. Green Jeans pointed out, our food policies it's almost like they've been designed to keep that inequity in place in our societies. And I personally really struggle with that, with how I incorporate those things into my own personal sort of daily efforts in life and into the things that we do as institutions. So I'd love to hear what the other panelists have to say about that.
I think kind of like Jenny just said, seeing them as one and the same. So seeing diversity and inclusion as part of food access, as naturally a part of that. I think for us, like specifically, that has been helping other farmers get started. So kind of moving away from like a competitive culture or a scarcity mindset to we need everybody, as many people farming as possible, and doing things that are supportive and encouraging to other farmers. But particularly for us, that has been helping people get land access, land ownership. We really feel like that's a key to full-time farming for people. And then I think normalizing food purchasing for all income levels, so that people are in spaces, whether they're low income or high income, and they're buying food together. And that is a normal experience that they aren't questioning or wondering about. So we're not dividing people up to, if you're low income, you get your food here. If you're high income, you buy your food here. Everybody gets the same food. And I feel like that is kind of some of the ways that we focus on that.
Something that I've been trying to pay more attention to lately is just looking at when the ideas grow out of the communities most impacted by the food access issue that it's looking to address. So, you know, I'm in the greater Louisville area, and there are I've only been here for, under 10 years, but I've already seen like a wave of businesses, agro development projects over the years come and go, and they were often, not people who were embedded in the community that were bringing solutions, but that had like a lot of social capital and access to financial capital. And now I think we are seeing also waves of really community-led initiatives being paid better attention to. And that is not, by coincidence. I think it's because of the deep community organizing being done by groups like the Louisville Community Grocery or the Black Market or Next Door Mobile Grocery, things like that in the greater Louisville area. So I think part of what makes these initiatives really nimble and responsive is that they are led by people who are organizing within their communities. And so, trying to really seek out those community-based initiatives and figure out how to help, how can they have access to the funding and resources that came somewhat seemingly easily to other projects that didn't have the community connection. So that's something I'm trying to pay attention to, is like who's leading the project.
I think the other folks have covered most of what I would say pretty well, so I'm not going to talk more.
Anybody else feel like they have any final thoughts on that for the moment?
There was actually a question in the chat box asking if there are any other farmers on the call who incorporate food justice or food access into your business model that differs from what the panelists are doing.
I heard this rule that if you count to 10 and nobody has replied on a Zoom, it's okay to keep going. So I'm going to do that. But if there is a farmer who does want to share down the road, you can throw it in the chat and Kristen can interrupt me and we will let you speak. Okay, thank you all for sharing. So a question more geared towards our times in the pandemic. So how did incentive programs, so SNAP, WIC, or Seniors Farmers Market Nutrition Program, respond to the pandemic? So how did incentive programs respond to the pandemic? And maybe I'll direct this directly to Brittany first, just because I feel like I know that you focus a lot on this, and then we can let the others, fill in, if that's okay with everyone.
Sure, that has absolutely been something on my mind a lot this year. Yeah, it has been an interesting year for the incentive programs, and certainly an interesting year to be someone who works with federal benefit programs directly, and interesting on the farmers market side as well. We've seen a lot more people at a lot of farmers markets, especially a lot of folks in high-risk populations. The food system and the food supply chain broke down in a lot of places, especially for local produce, especially for things like meat and eggs. Or folks felt unsafe going to their local grocery stores, and farmers markets kind of provided an alternate option for a lot of folks who are high risk, and low income populations tend to be disproportionately impacted by a lot of health issues that would make them high risk. So farmers markets saw a lot of new folks coming who they hadn't seen before, especially on the SNAP and WIC and senior programs. So that was a benefit and a role that markets were able to provide, which was great. The other programs, the farmers market nutrition programs, I believe, maybe struggled a bit this year because those are higher risk populations that did have a harder time getting out. SNAP, however, is meant to be a responsive program in times of crisis. It's meant to kind of come and go a bit with the economy, respond really strongly when the economy is bad and folks need it, and ease up a bit when they don't. And that happened. You know, lots of people were added to the SNAP rolls in the spring, and our incentive program kind of exploded for SNAP over the course of this year. A lot of our markets saw, you know, up to a 200% increase in their SNAP sales, if not more, over the course of the year. And a lot of that was new customers. The PEBT program, so folks who were getting SNAP benefits to replace free and reduced lunch, also contributed a lot to that. So benefit programs that can be responsive to these crises have been extremely helpful for folks, and a lot of that has gone to local farmers, which is great.
So now I'll open it up. Michelle, Jenny, or Bree, if you all have things to add.
I think we're in this for the long haul, and I think it's going to be interesting to see how these programs continue to pivot to meet need, because this is not over by any means. And I think it's going to be interesting to watch. It's full-time work living in poverty and applying for these kinds of benefits and these kinds of programs. And I don't know. I mean, it's not my area of expertise for sure, but I'm more often alarmed than comforted when I look at programs that are meant to help people in times of crisis. And this has certainly been no different.
We as a farm had to make some really intentional decisions at the start of this, that we were going to, you know, it felt, we had to believe that our market would stay open, that we would do whatever we had to do to stay safe, which meant a whole lot of hard work. And we had to make sure it was important to us that people who were coming to the market with WIC and Senior and SNAP and later PEBT, or for the Fresh RX for Moms program, that they had as much free will and free choice in buying product off the table. And it was a very hard decision, because there was a lot of focus on starting CSAs or doing home delivery or doing even curbside pickup at the market. But we fully believed we had worked so hard to build up these programs, to normalize it, to invite people. And what we didn't want to do is, we didn't want there to be, here's this food for people who have financial means, and then there's not anything left or very little left for people who are lower income. We did not want that division to happen. And so that meant saying no to people when they were calling and asking to join our CSA or you know, to be a part of our farm membership that we have here. But it just meant just being really intentional about knowing the reality of what food we have, and then figuring out how do we distribute it as equitably as possible. And that actually meant not just the farmers market, but to farm to school, the food pantry we deliver to. You know, all these things have been loyal to us. So it was us remaining loyal to them, even in a time when we could have kind of went to the highest bidder, I guess. So, and then not knowing how it would turn out. It's turned out great, but we didn't know that in the beginning, so.
Do we have any final thoughts from our panelists on this topic of incentive programs during the pandemic? All right, I'm going to move on to the next question. And it goes along with this. And I think it's kind of a great transition after what Michelle just shared. And it is, what changes did you see in food access this year? So just kind of piggybacking off that. So I understand it's similar.
So I think this year we saw just the logistical side of accessing food just really be front and center for whether people were able to, you know, plug into different avenues of how we sell food. So, you know, I talked about our big partnership with New Roots, and, you know, traditionally those are in-person market style pickups, and many people were limited from being able to get to markets, you know, public transportation challenges with COVID, people that are high-risk populations, and, you know, the ways that New Roots adapted to that was just like putting in more hours, more volunteer time, more support time to do deliveries and things. We saw our curbside pickup at farmers markets, like Michelle mentioned, you know, just skyrocket, but that was not open to SNAP customers. So, you know, for folks that were high risk, and or even people who weren't high risk but had other reasons that walking around a farmer's market wasn't accessible for them, you know, it seems like we're not yet to the point where the nutrition programs are able to be adaptive enough, quick enough to pivot to the market opportunities that show up, you know. So like the curbside stuff was blowing up, you know, all over the country, and folks weren't able to tap into it yet. So those are just a couple of the changes that we saw.
There were two things. Oh, go ahead, Brittany.
I was going to agree with that. It definitely, as Michelle was saying earlier, in a lot of cases did sort of create two different classes of shoppers, particularly based on where you can use federal benefits. There are a handful of places where you can use EBT online. The federal government was pretty slow to expand that, even early on in the pandemic. Certainly before that, they were. So at both markets and retail, it was definitely dividing who was able to shop safely and who wasn't, who was able to shop accessibly in this situation and who wasn't, especially if you were high risk and low income. But one other thing that we did see is, particularly during the crisis, on the side of the benefits themselves, so many more people needing them meant that a lot more requirements were waived. A lot of extra money went into those programs and administering them. Annual reviews for folks on SNAP were postponed for quite a while. A lot more people were able to access those benefits due to how many people needed them this year, which did increase food access for a lot of folks who needed it. The implementation of PEBT, the pandemic EBT program, also, from what we've seen at farmers markets, eliminated a lot of the stigma around SNAP, because suddenly so many more people were using SNAP benefits that hadn't even ever had EBT cards before, because they automatically distributed to so many people. So suddenly a much higher percentage of people at the market were using incentive tokens and SNAP tokens. So I've seen some food access efforts destigmatized in a lot of spaces as well, which has been one positive side of this in some ways.
Yeah, we experienced that at our market for sure. We had vendors who have always just kind of been neutral towards our outreach programs, that then now their kids had gotten PBT, or other people in the community. And I think it really helped create kind of some unity at a time when we really needed it. We had two kind of very unexpected things that came from COVID. One of them was we'd been doing fresh food delivery to a local food pantry called Hotel Inc. in Bowling Green for about 7 years. We do a weekly delivery year round. But what we realized were that people who are food insecure, particularly those who had COVID, so we were originally like kind of really focusing on people who had been diagnosed with COVID, and then also refugees who needed culturally appropriate food. We started doing medically tailored meals, and those are being distributed by a dietitian at the local medical center. And so being able to get food to people that they were going to be able to eat, and that was with home delivery. The second thing that has come out just surprisingly with COVID is the local schools contacted us, and they had students that, these are not ag students, they're not in the FFA, they're not in 4-H, they don't live on farms, that they wanted to work on figuring out some work programs, co-op programs. And so we were able to create the farming, we're calling it Farming, Culinary Arts, and Community Organizing Co-op. And those students come out to the farm and work, and they have been able to go into the community in Allen County that we're not from and reach people that are food insecure that we would never have reached on our own. And then we have teenagers that are getting farm experience and cooking experience and understanding what it's like to be in a meeting where you're discussing with the health department in the schools and food pantries how to get fresh food to people. And so that's just kind of been a really rewarding thing that came from COVID.
Do we have any final thoughts on that, changes in food access this year? Okay, well, I have one more question for you all before we kind of open it up to our audience's questions a little more broadly. And this one is one of hope. So what are your hopes for the future of food access in Kentucky?
So my hope for food access in Kentucky is that we have a lot of food initiatives that are operating at the same time and crossing paths with each other and intersecting, but not all doing the same thing. I think the point that Jenny brought up earlier, where there's this discussion is is it good for farmers or is it good for food access? I think that my hope is that tension just dissipates and that we can see that every initiative, whether it's, distributing USDA commodity boxes, or buying at a local farmers market, that all of these things are part of the bigger puzzle, and that we all win when they advance, if they're rooted in community and responsive and accountable to their community. I mean, that's really, to me, is the only requirement for a food access or farming initiative. So my hope is just that we just throw everything against the wall that people are doing, these ideas that people are having, and that lots of things are happening at the same time.
And I'd like to see, Lauren McCourt spoke earlier about how a lot of people don't know what to do with fresh food. We've sort of lost that knowledge. And also a lot of people just don't have time. When you're working 2 40-hour-a-week jobs trying to just make ends meet, you don't have time to sit and snap beans on the porch with Granny as much as you'd like to do it. So I'd like to see us continue to find ways to minimally process foods, or to get foods in, that are just easier for people to use. I'm really, really proud of the work that Northfork Local Foods and Jennifer Weber had a huge hand in this, have done working with Hyman Settlement School to get some minimally processed foods into local grocery stores. That kind of stuff I think is exciting as well. I love the farmers market, and I love for that to happen, but creating more and more avenues for our farmers to sell their food, and more ways for people to access it in ways that they'll actually use it, I think are crucial to continuing to make sure that people are eating well. It's hard to have time to cook things, and it's hard to pick up a squash sometimes and know what to do with it if you haven't cooked it before. But grabbing a package of locally grown, minimally processed, chopped, flash frozen squash that you can throw into a soup or a stew or a chili is probably a lot more within the reach of many of our consumers. So I hope we can continue to explore avenues like that in our state and our country.
I think a lot about 20 years ago when we started this work and we sat around tables and we were having discussions and meetings like this that feel very similar to the one we're having today. We, we're talking about how do we get more people to farm, and I feel like we're at a really good point where rather than it being overwhelming, we can think about how, think about this from a place of hope, but there's a lot of people that need work. There's a lot of people that are rethinking college. There's a lot of people rethinking debt. There's a lot of people rethinking what is a lifestyle that is of value. And I really think normalizing small, not necessarily even small scale, but food production as a career, a real career. And so that means we're going to have to talk about things like debt and what kind of education you need to have to do that, and land ownership, but how do we figure out a way to get people that want to be farming and keep them farming. So I feel like that's kind of where I feel hopeful though, that we're at a place where that we'll see that happening more.
I guess I'm thinking I'd like to see a lot more engagement and leadership on both kind of a macro and micro level. Bree was talking a lot earlier about just folks engaging in their own communities and leading their own movements and change within communities, rather than folks kind of coming in from outside, and that sort of autonomy being really valuable. And I would definitely like to see that even within incentive programs and food access programs at the market level. Those are always better when farmers and folks in the community and low-income folks benefiting from them are making a lot of decisions about how those programs should look. So I would certainly like to see a lot more of that moving forward. But then on the other extreme, also a lot more acknowledgement from funders and folks at much higher levels, like insurance companies, healthcare providers, legislators, that food is part of healthcare and is part of communities in Kentucky, and is extremely important and needs to be acknowledged as such.
So with all this being said, thank you. It's nice to kind of end the more structured part of this with like what we're hopeful for. But I want to open it up, so I'm going to refer to Kristen. Are there any questions currently in the chat box that we need to ask our panelists?
It doesn't look like it. There was a question earlier, but it looks as though that was answered by a few of our panelists in the chat box.
Okay.
So
well, then I guess I'll.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, sorry. I guess then I'll just open it up. If you feel like you want to ask a question, feel free to unmute yourself and ask away, or you can type it in the chat box and Kristen can read it to us, whatever you feel most comfortable with. I'm not quite sure how long to wait on this because I just opened it up to a bunch of people, but I did see Kelsey put her video on, so maybe that means she has a question.
Well, just a comment for now, but hello, everybody. I just wanted to say thank you, first of all, to all of our panelists. I'm so glad that and proud and everything to be working with all y'all. You're my heroes. You're doing great stuff. And now I forget what else I was going to say. But essentially, I don't know. I feel like we're at a point, and a lot of y'all have touched on this too, because you've been doing this work for decades longer than I have, but we're at a point right now where there is a lot of stuff going on and a lot of people are thinking about food access work at least, and or involved in it in some way. And I think where we go from here is just doing more of that dot connecting and making it easier for, as has been said, easier for farmers to grow food, easier for folks to get food from local farmers. Like it shouldn't be that hard, but there are a lot of hoops. So just figuring out, how do we really build authentic relationships with our community members, and how do we really build this system that supports growers and supports eaters of all income levels. And we're doing it, but there's more work to be done.
I really am so proud to be part of CFA, to be on the CFA board, and all the stuff that the staff and the board members too do and support. It's really important, and I hope that everybody who's on this Ag Chat tonight can make it to the annual meeting to help us shape the way that we move in the future.
Looks like we got a question in the chat box. What are ways that a consumer can support local food access?
We were really grateful with our Fresh Stop Market, and I'm assuming that everyone knows what that is, but in case you don't, you can Google it and look it up. But it's basically a sliding scale pop-up farm fresh market, and people pay based on their ability. So we have 3 levels of payment. The shares actually cost us around, in Hazard anyway, at our market, around $24, $25 per share. And we have some people who are lower income and on SNAP who pay $12, some people who pay that full price of $25. And then we've got some food justice warriors who pay $40 for their share to help subsidize other people being able to afford fresh, healthy food. And I don't want us to have to, rely on those kinds of donations to make fresh, healthy, local food available to everyone. But in the interim running up to getting where it is, it's incredibly helpful. And we really hope in Hazard that we can sort of expand that word and get that out so that more people will become food justice warriors and participate in programs like Fresh Stop Market, throw some money in our SNAP jar that we have set out for donations. I don't think that really answered the question, but.
One thing that we did that when I think about it now, just because these conversations have continued, is we were really forthcoming with our customers about why we were making the decisions we were making. So why they weren't allowed to just buy up everything that we had, why we were distributing it equitably to all income levels and what that looked like, and the sacrifice they were participating in by being patient and waiting or taking only their share. And there were maybe a very small handful that didn't like being told that. The majority of them were thankful that they were getting to enter into a conversation like that, and have since then been even more likely to say, what can we do? How can we participate? How can we get involved? And these are customers we've had for 5-7 years or longer, who are at the very first time really thinking about their participation in food access.
Hi, this is Brittany. I know my video disappeared. My internet appears to be a little spotty, but I'm still here. As far as the incentive side goes for our programs, 2 things. Number 1, tell people about our programs. We do our best with outreach, but we rely a lot on communities and folks who work with our partner organizations to spread the word, both to folks in power who can help us and also to low-income folks who can utilize the program. So that's really important. Also, just support your local small farmers and your local farmers market. These programs take a lot of energy to run at the market level, and generally can't operate at markets without a paid manager or a very dedicated volunteer. so it takes a lot of support for markets to run these programs. So if you're able to volunteer or donate to your local markets, ask them what they need, ask what kind of support your local markets need. It takes a lot for these programs to operate. And it helps when folks know that it's appreciated, I think.
Do we have any more questions from folks in the audience? Well, then I guess what I will do to our panelists, is there anything that you didn't get to share that I didn't directly ask or somebody didn't ask that you just feel really called to share about food access in regards to local foods? I just want to open that up. Any final thoughts from you all?
I'm seeing a question in the chat box. Is there any legislation that is coming up in 2021 session we should know about?
Hey y'all. Yeah, I put a response in the chat, but essentially, probably. I need to check. I haven't looked at the pre-filed bills yet, and we just had an election, so need to check and see what seats have changed and how that might affect things. But we are expecting another bill similar to last year that was really contentious around, it was targeting like SNAP and Medicaid and other safety net type programs that will work with our coalition partners to oppose. We are also working to introduce a piece of legislation that would help secure state dollars, set aside state dollars to leverage additional like federal money to support programs like Kentucky Double Dollars, wow, that are supporting farmers and food access programs. But yeah, if y'all can subscribe to our policy newsletter if you want to be up to date on what's happening, especially we'll be sending that out regularly with updates on state bills during the session. And I will try and find the link to subscribe to our newsletters and put that in the chat.
I saw a question about how do we move, food access, food equity from like a Band-Aid. And I think one of the things that we have to do, and it has to be included in this work, is realizing that food isn't the root issue. The root issue is living wages, healthcare, generational poverty. So until we start really getting into what is somebody's real reason that they're experiencing poverty and hunger, we're not going to see solutions. But I do feel like moving from the handout of a box of food or the food, like a food pantry, towards people going to the market and using supplemental nutrition program dollars with local farmers really, really helps people, and it helps them. And we have vendors of the market that started at our market as SNAP participants, and so I do feel like it is a really good step in the right direction.
And I'll just add, I think for our farm's experience, we were able to make our food more affordable by working with a partner like New Roots that really looked at what some of our cost pressure points were. So it's actually pretty expensive for us to go to a farmer's market, but it's much less expensive for us to bulk deliver, bushel boxes of 6 different items in quantity for 300 people at one place. And in doing that, we were able to get our cost down to that customer. And so, you know, whether that bell pepper is a certain price at the farmer's market or a different price at Food Access does not really mean the farmer is making a really big different income, but it's really kind of looking at what are some of the pressure points for cost of the farmers. So I think that's one area to lean into, is just creative ways to look at cost.
Do we have any other questions? Okay, well, since we don't, I'm gonna just kind of wrap us up, if that's all right with you all. But interrupt me if something's like you thought it came to mind. You got to know. So first, I just want to thank Jenny and Bree and Michelle and Brittany for sharing all that they shared and for being open to answering our questions. And then also just thank you all for the work that you do to provide food access and to talk about this and to educate folks about what you're doing and why you're doing it. So we're really grateful that you were here tonight to share with us. I just want to remind folks that this, like I said, was the second of 4 ag chats. So next week, on November 12th, we'll have a climate change ag chat, which myself and Bethany Pratt will be facilitating. And we have a great group of panelists as well for that. So please feel free to join us at 6:30 again, same time, Zoom and everything. And then also just a reminder, I think Kelsey may have put this in the chat, but our annual meeting is December 4th via Zoom. And so more information will be coming out about that. But our big goal for that is to really make headway on our strategic plan. And we would love input from folks of all areas of food and farming to share with us what our, focus and drive should be coming, moving forward. Last, I'll make one more plug, and maybe I'll ask Maggie to throw this back in the chat since we've had quite a bit of activity there. But just if you're interested in learning more about CFA or you're interested in becoming a member, to visit cfaky.org, which will have all the about, mission statement, goals, objectives, programs, and then a link to become a member. And then lastly, we plan to send a follow-up survey to you all, again, just to gain and glean some information for the strategic plan about this ag chat, because healthy food access is one of the large portions of that plan. So just know that that will be coming your way, and it should be quick and easy to respond to, and we'd really appreciate it if you have the time to do that. So that being said, I'll just ask Maggie or Kristen or Margie if we have any other things we want to share with the group before we sign off. And then I should shout out to Kristen and Maggie and Margie for doing all the background work for this ag chat. So we thank you all for being here. We're really thankful. I felt really happy with this turnout. I hope you all did too. And just remember, you might see this in a recording down the road via YouTube or the podcast. So with that, unless I saw Kathy pop up in her video, which could mean that she has a question. But with that, we can slowly start to sign off unless we have any last words.
I do have a question. Actually, it's more of a comment.
Okay.
What I'm hearing from our panelists especially is that a huge part of what they do is compassion, having compassion for each other, I think, rather than going for the bucks, they go for the human heart. And so I really, really, really appreciate all of the work that y'all are doing. Thank you.
All right, everyone, it's been quiet. So I'm going to say that I hope you have a good night. We hope to see you at the next 2 Ag Chats, and hopefully we'll be seeing you all soon. So have a good evening.
Thank you, Jann.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.